Imagine this for a second. Your entire country, maybe over 100 million people, depending almost completely on one single thing: water. Now, what happens when that water flows through other countries too? Countries with their own plans, their own needs.
Yeah, the pressure just builds and builds. It can become incredibly tense.
Exactly. The stakes get incredibly high, like life or death high. Makes you really wonder how these things ever get sorted out.
It's a huge question, really, playing out all over the world, but maybe nowhere more intensely right now than the Nile River Basin.
You took the words right out of my mouth. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, this critical issue of water security along the Nile. Specifically, we're looking at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, and, well, all the tension around it.
Right, and we're basing this on some pretty direct recent statements from Egypt's President, Sisi, but also weaving in the history, the context around the dam, the agreements. Yeah, the bigger picture. So our goal here, for you listening, is to really unpack all these different angles, the history, the potential impacts, why it's all so complicated.
We want to get a clearer sense of why this is being called, a matter of life or death for millions, and really what's on the line for everyone involved.
Okay, let's start with Egypt's position.
Yeah.
President Sisi has been, very clear. He's made some strong warnings saying Egypt won't ignore any, quote, existential threat to its water security, its share of the Nile.
A very direct language.
And he specifically rejected unilateral measures in the Eastern Nile. That's clearly pointing at the GERD, right? What's the weight behind a statement like that?
Oh, absolutely. That's aimed squarely at the GERD. Yeah. And you have to understand why Egypt's stance is so firm. Their dependence on the Nile. It's not just important, it's almost total.
Almost total.
Yeah, our sources say Egypt, quote, depends entirely on Nile water and has no other alternatives, entirely. So when Sisi says saving this water is a matter of life or death for over 105 million Egyptians, that's not just political talk.
That's the reality on the ground.
It's the stark reality, yeah. No plan B.
So life or death, because there literally are no other major water sources for them.
Yeah.
Can we put some numbers on that dependence? What are the actual water shares they're talking about?
Yeah, the numbers really drive it home. Egypt's historical share is set at about 55.5 billion cubic meters a year. Sudan's is around 18.5 billion cubic meters.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. You add those together, and it's only about 4% of the Nile Basin's total annual flow that actually makes it into the main river channels downstream.
Only 4%? Wow. Where does the rest go?
Well, a huge amount is lost within the basin itself, evaporation, swamps like the Sud in South Sudan, seepage, long before it reaches Egypt and Sudan. So that 4% they rely on, it's a tiny fraction of the total water, and it's already stretched incredibly thin.
That scarcity really explains their position. Now, is it just about the water volume for President Sisi? Or does Cairo see other factors at play here?
Well, he did mention seeing it potentially as part of a pressure campaign for other things. So, yeah, there's a sense of wider geopolitics.
Okay.
But he also made it clear, Cairo says it doesn't oppose development in other basin countries. The condition is just that it can't cut the water flow to Egypt and Sudan.
So development, yes, but not at our expense, basically.
That's the message. He really emphasized cooperation, finding mutual interests instead of actions that hurt Egypt and Sudan's historical claims.
Has Egypt been trying to push for that cooperation? Are there specific things they're doing?
Yes. Sisi actually gave a nod to Uganda's role in the Nile Basin Initiative. That's the group trying to manage the river cooperatively.
Right, the NBI.
Exactly. And he mentioned Egypt's work with something called the Septenary Committee, which is a technical group trying to figure out water sharing. He stressed that dialogue, talking it through, is vital.
Okay, so despite the strong warnings, there's still an emphasis on talking. But the core problem, the thing causing all this tension, is how the GERD is filled and operated. Tell us a bit more about the dam itself first.
Sure. The GERD, Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Construction started back in 2011. It's set to be the biggest hydroelectric dam in Africa. They've just announced final construction is done, and they're expecting an official opening maybe in September.
Africa's largest hydro dam. That's huge. So what's the actual disagreement about its operation?
It boils down to this. Egypt and Sudan want a legally binding agreement between all three countries, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, on how the dam is filled and, crucially, how it's operated, especially during droughts or dry years.
They want rules locked down in writing.
Precisely, to guarantee their water shares aren't compromised.
And Ethiopia's view on that?
Ethiopia says, well, basically, We don't think a binding agreement like that is necessary. They state they have no intention of harming downstream interests.
So one side wants ironclad rules, the other says trust us.
That's a simplified way of putting it, but yeah, that's the core impasse. And it's led to this stalemate. Talks were frozen for 3 years, started up again briefly in 2023.
And then froze again this year, 2024.
Exactly. Stuck.
Which really brings us to the history, doesn't it? Because you dig into that and you see why these positions are so, well, dug in. There's this thing called the Entebbe Framework Agreement. What's that about?
Right, the Entebbe Agreement. It was announced way back in 1999, aiming for a new framework for Nile cooperation. It was signed in 2010 by Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi.
Okay, mostly upstream countries.
Mostly upstream, yes. And South Sudan just joined this year in July 2024. But Egypt and Sudan, they've consistently rejected it.
Why? What's their objection?
Because, they argue, Entebbe completely ignores the older treaties, specifically ones from 1902, 1929, and especially 1959.
The historical agreements.
Those are the agreements that establish those water quotas we mentioned, the 55.5 billion cubic meters for Egypt, 18.5 for Sudan. Entebbe doesn't recognize those specific numbers in the same way.
So it's a clash between historical rights set in colonial-era treaties and a more recent framework pushed by upstream countries wanting more flexibility.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about documents, it's about fundamentally different views. You've got established rights, mainly benefiting downstream nations, versus the argument for the sovereign right of an upstream nation like Ethiopia to develop its own resources for its own people.
That's a deep divide. You can see why the negotiations keep hitting a wall.
It explains a lot of the stubbornness, yes.
And Uganda, you mentioned them earlier with the Nile Basin Initiative. They were involved in Sisi's recent talks too, right? What's their angle?
Yeah, Ugandan President Museveni was involved. His statements focused more broadly on strengthening ties with Egypt development, investment, partnership. It suggests, a wider interest in regional stability and cooperation beyond just the dam itself.
So trying to keep broader diplomatic channels open, perhaps.
It seems that way, yes. A desire for collaboration.
Okay, so let's try and tie this all together for everyone listening. What we're seeing here isn't just a fight over a dam. It's way more complex.
It really is. You've got these old treaties clashing with new development dreams, all layered on top of the absolute basic need for water in a region where it's scarce. Survival, essentially.
And the core challenge seems to be balancing Ethiopia's right to develop, to harness its river for its people,
against Egypt and Sudan's critical existential need for that same water downstream, water they've historically relied on completely.
It really puts the stakes in perspective. When President Sisi uses words like existential, based on that near-total dependency,
it carries immense weight. It highlights just how difficult finding a compromise will be.
So this whole situation, this deep dive into the Nile, it really shines a light on a massive global challenge, doesn't it? How do countries share resources that are absolutely vital, finite, when the needs are so desperate and the histories are so complicated?
Exactly. And maybe the thought to leave you with is this. When one nation's development project, however necessary they feel it is, potentially impacts the literal survival of millions in another nation, what responsibility does that carry? How do we balance progress with preservation when the cost could be so incredibly high?